5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Off the Front Podcast. On today's show, I'm joined by Debbie Milne. In U.S. Masters Cycling, Debbie is a legend, with 9 national championship titles to her name, having won 2 just recently in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She won the U.S. Masters National Road title and also the Masters Criterium title. Debbie also has multiple top 10 finishes in the U.S. Pro National Championship races, and in 2012, Debbie competed as a tandem bicycle pilot for para-athlete Carissa Witzel. Together, the two of them won the Para-National Time Trial Championship. So Debbie is definitely an accomplished cyclist. Most recently, people may have heard her name if they are listeners to Lance Armstrong's podcast during the Tour de France, The Move, where Debbie won the age group category for the We Do Segment Challenge. Not only is Debbie an accomplished cyclist, but she's also a registered and licensed clinical and wellness dietitian. As a nutrition expert, Debbie is also the founder of the Supra Functional Food Bars Company. This is a bar that Debbie developed to meet the nutritional needs of endurance athletes, and those can be found at suprabars.com. And perhaps my favorite thing about Debbie is her racing style. Debbie is known for her aggressive style of racing, usually a series of attacks until one of those sticks, and her favorite way to win is off the front. I'm super excited for her to come on the show today, and so let's get started. Debbie Milne, welcome to the show. Just for the listeners, I want to do a quick intro for you and just talk about you a little bit. So you've been racing since 2000, and over that time you've had 9 individual Masters National Championship titles. You've had well over 150 wins, probably closer to 200. And my favorite part of that is that most of those wins are off the front by yourself. And so I think you're well known for your aggressive racing style. And it's fitting that the Off the Front podcast would have you as pretty much the quintessential off the front cyclist. So I wrote a blog post one time about how I love when a racer goes off the front. It's the most exciting part of racing, in my opinion. And so it's exciting, actually, that you're here with us as the off the front cyclist. So welcome to the show. And also, congratulations on your most recent national championship, which was August 6th in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So tell us about that race.
Okay, so well, it was at altitude, and I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, and there's a lot of climbing, but we're only at about where I live is about 900 feet of altitude, so that's a factor. When you go out to where the oxygen is, you just don't have as much oxygen. So it was interesting because you go out to Masters racing. Usually, if it's on the West Coast or the East Coast, you see a heavier concentration of riders that are from either the West or the East Coast. So as I went over there, I'm the only one coming from the East Coast, and I don't necessarily know all of the riders. I can stalk them, so to speak, on road results and such and see what they're doing. But I also have learned that tells you nothing compared to how strong they actually are.
Right.
So, yeah, it went wonderful. I did prepare a little bit by going to the Blue Ridge Parkway and riding at maybe 3,000-4,000 feet and sleeping a little bit for, maybe a week. That's not a lot, but I did that. And about 3 weeks after that, I went out to that event. So, I made a plan. I reconned the course. I jumped earlier than I thought people would expect. Because I think they were waiting on this really tough climb. And I just saw, and it was only 32 miles, like one lap.
Okay.
So, so you don't get to do a lap and see how people respond to attacks and that such a thing. So for the road race, that plan worked out. I ended up with one other girl. I waited on her. She was bridging up, so we worked together. I jumped her early, maybe 6K to go, and made a nice gap that she couldn't recover. So I was really thankful that I tried something that would have been a challenge to hold her off that far. And then the criterion was, of course, it was 45 minutes, so not long. Ended up in another break with two other women. One of them was, pretty big credentials, world champion, a lot of national championships in track and cross, and I'd never met her before. Another early unexpected jump on the bell lap, and I held it off. So I was really thankful. It's hard to win one, much less, two jerseys.
Yeah. No, that's actually, I didn't know that you won the crit championship also. So congrats on that too. I knew you won the road race, and I looked at the road race.
Granted, like at all, because, everybody that comes out there, they prepare a lot. It's a total cost, and it means everything to anybody that wins it. So, I never take anything for granted, and they're always hard to win. So, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, like I said, I knew you won the road, and that it was where you had a 30-second lead on the second place finisher. And that was kind of my guess, was that you had gone early, maybe brought one with you. And because the two of you finished with a pretty substantial lead over the third place, I think the two of you had like a 7-minute gap over the third place finisher. So that was kind of another impressive and aggressive race there for you. Could you tell that's your altitude training in the Blue Ridge Mountains? Could you tell that, or do you think that was effective, spending the week at altitude, and how do you think that played off for you?
Well, that's always kind of tough, because, the control for that would be to go back in time and do it, without.
Right.
That's what I did for Colorado, which was similar. We were in the, 5,000 something, elevation, and, similar situation. I had done that year. What I found was the efforts I made taxed me more, like with oxygen.
Okay.
I felt like I shouldn't be as out of breath as I was to try to do the same effort. But so would that have been worse or more of a factor if I hadn't gone? I don't know.
Hard to say.
I read some of the, does it help? Because it's worked twice, I will do it again if we go back out there.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, the reason I was asking, because you hear these pro Peloton guys that do these altitude camps before the tour because they're going to spend time in the Alps and in the Pyrenees, but I didn't think, and really until you mentioned that, I had never thought about the domestic scene, like the people here spending time at altitude. And honestly, I didn't even consider that Albuquerque was at altitude. But you're right, though, that that is something to take into consideration.
Yeah, because your hematocrit and hemoglobin, oxygen carrying capacity increases, and that exercise, like the physiology part, isn't really my field of study. But I was reading a little bit about, like, okay, what's the optimal racing day? Like, I know red blood cells live 3 months. So once your body's like, oh crap, we need some more red blood cells, how long does it take to grow these red blood cells? And I think I read one, and I'm not an expert on this, but I thought I read like day 17 after returning would be an optimal.
Okay.
And that was just one that I was reading, but I do know it takes a couple of weeks for your body to respond to that stress of being in a low oxygen environment. So I tried to time it like that, where I would I didn't want to go train and then, 1 week and then the next week go out there.
Right.
Because you won't recover as well as altitude, from what I understand. And I've heard a lot about arrive the day before or be there for a week, but I generally, going into different time zones, I usually have this drag about 2 days after I travel. Like, I'm just feeling beat up. So I have to get there in time to be able to get past that, and then at least feel rested, if nothing else. So that's usually how I plan it. Yeah.
Well, whatever you did seemed to work. I mean, because like I said,
different.
yeah. You leave with 2 titles. So, so I think you're right. Next time, replicate that and hope for the best. I mean, it seemed to work just fine.
Yeah. The challenge is fun for sure. You never know who is going to show up. So,
yeah. Well, I want to back up a little bit too. And how did you find cycling? Because you said you started in 2000. What was it that led you to the bike?
Well, as a kid, we played around on a bike. As a kid, if you have a bike, you find out I can get somewhere faster on my bike than walking. So you want to go play with when you ride your bike. I eventually got a horse, and we didn't have, I wasn't driving, and my parents worked, and So I'd ride the bike so it was a vehicle, basically. The bike was a vehicle, and I quit using it as a vehicle probably when I was 11 or 12. 13, I didn't have a horse anymore, so no more biking. Then I went to college, and the first year I figured out, once again, driving to class really sucked, because you have to find a parking place and you're walking a mile. So my brother had a bike he wasn't using, and I just hopped on it and started riding to class. And then back then, not a lot of people rode. So it was me and some exchange students. I don't know if they were exchange, but from China, because they use bikes a lot. There's 3 bikes on campus, and I was one of them. So I just commuted everywhere. And then I ran into some people that were doing mountain biking. And I had never even knew people raced bikes. I seriously never knew that people raced bikes. So we went off on the trails and did mountain biking. And eventually I found out, you get, and I did sports my whole life, 4 sports, like cross country, track, basketball, and I cheered. Okay. It's kind of like an iffy sport, but then I realized, but I was competitive. So I was like, oh, that's fun. So I started doing mountain bike races in college, and then after having kids, same thing, used the bike to take them to the park. I would haul 3 kids in a burly trailer in a bike seat. Probably wouldn't do that now with distracted driving, but that I would haul them to the park. And I started racing shortly after my youngest got 2 years old. And people were saying you're really strong. You should race. So I tried it. Yeah. And then I found out you could make money racing. And that's primarily why I raced for the longest time, is because I could make money, extra money for my kiddos. Yep. I mean, people think I have to win, or I'm real competitive and I really love to win. But what it came down to was I wanted to make money for my, for my family. that's why I rode so hard. So when I went to a race, I might be able to count on a good chance of making some cash.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, that's a sign of, I think, honestly, that's a sign of your fitness too, because I think my total winnings over my race career may be a tub of chamois cream and maybe $15. So you definitely had the talent and the genetics to do well with that. What was the women's cycling scene like back then? Because that's one of the things I was kind of curious to ask you about is the health of the women's cycling scene today, because it seems, I mean, you're hearing a lot about, or at least, so I've been following cycling for quite a while, and I'm hearing more about women's cycling now than I remember ever hearing. So I'm guessing that it maybe wasn't such a strong scene when you got into cycling, but I don't know. So how's the cycling scene changed for the women's cycling?
So this is coming definitely from a Alhambra perspective, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. I always loved T-Bird, by the way, Tennessee racing, always well organized. And back then, for a long time, you didn't get on, I know this ages me, but you didn't just get on the internet and look for little races. You would go to one race and somebody would put a flyer in your car and you would learn about the next race. Yeah. Huh. So or you might see them posted in Velo News. You'd look in the regions and find races. It was crazy. But there wasn't too much women. We only had Cat 4, kind of like the men started out. Wasn't enough women to have a Cat 5, so we only had Cat 4. And what I found was a lot of people, I used to watch races for a while before I raced, and I would be and I'm thinking how is there such a discrepancy in how some women are doing versus others? And I didn't realize that they would put so many categories together, and that could be very discouraging to a woman of a lower category, because you're in a public, especially a criterium, everybody's watching. And when you're getting dropped and lapped, you have to be really tough mentally to say, that's not going to get to me. That's not going to get to me, the fact that I just got lapped twice by the fastest woman in the field. So I remember they used to often, because the fields were light enough, they would put us with the masters men or the juniors, which for someone like me was very frustrating, because if you started together, a lot of times they'd say you can race together. So what would happen is, my card was to attack until I got away, because that was a guarantee that no one would contend me for first place money. Yeah. And so sometimes the men would chase me back, or the juniors, and then they'd stop racing and they caught me, and I'd be like, why are you guys doing this to me? I just went down the road. We're not even, but so that part was frustrating. But also it helped other women be able to stay in touch with the race. So, maybe that part of it was good. But then it got to where they would dedicate our race. And I remember the year that they had a series totally dedicated to Cat 4 women. Mm-hmm. So they'd say, you do not have to race with the 1, 2, 3s. We're guaranteed this whole series. It's just you, prize money, everything. And I remember that was a real big hit. Yeah. And now I'm in the I'm in the, I don't know, still southeast, like in the Greenville area. I see that they do mostly give, they don't do open women as much, and they do give category 4 or 5. But I personally, and I'm not putting down USA Cycling, I don't know why they added a category 5, because 4 wasn't overwhelmed. So what
Right.
a lot of times they'll do is they'll race the 4 5s together and put the 1 2 3s together. And the 3s may not have the experience that, kind of like talking about masters racing, like
Yeah.
they still have a lot of lessons to learn about
Mhm.
safety and not, flying into a corner and messing up, because I had to learn them too. I had to go through that. So I didn't really love to see some of the professional level races having a 1 2 3 category in it,
Mhm.
with women and a lot more crashes. It's probably debatable if there were more crashes because there were 3s or just because it was a bigger field. But in any case, it has changed a lot where, I think, as long as they keep those 4 or 5 separate and they have a chance to learn, maybe the sport will grow. Because I've heard some of them talk. They don't like it when we start them all together. A lot of times they're asked, "Can we please start 5 minutes back?"
Yeah.
Because they feel like they're out of their league. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe that is something that will help. Because it's a pretty steep learning curve when you jump into a race, and like you said, when you're a beginner and the field takes off, and I mean, you get dropped in the first lap or into the first corner, and you're off the back already, and it's hard to mentally keep coming back week after week, and and getting to the place where you need to be where that doesn't happen. So maybe by creating a Cat 5 group for the women and grouping 5s and 4s together, it gives them their race, and then eventually they can move up and while they're in the 4 and 5 can develop those skills. And so hopefully it'll help.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think they don't realize like that just because they aren't in that place at that race, like that that you can get there. Like I usually will tell them, "Hey, I've been in your spot.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time. Your fitness is going to get up. You're going to figure it out. You're going to learn how not to waste your energy." And
Mhm.
and I think if they have their own race, it feels respectful to the fact that they need to get to that level, and it does take hard work. And
Yeah.
some stronger riders just progress really fast and get out
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting too. I mean, that's funny to think about because, you said you started there and like I started there. And, I guess that's something that people forget, that every cyclist, no matter what kind of genetics they have, they do start at some point, and they're probably pretty horrible racers at first. And they're probably inefficient on the bike and don't understand group tactics and how the groups move and, how just the flow of the peloton. But yeah, like I remember my first group ride, I got dropped in our neutral zone. And I showed up thinking I was like, okay, I'm pretty fit, and showed up and like for real, I got dropped before we started actually riding fast. And so it does take some mental fortitude to keep showing up. And I think a lot of people, and this may be a move that helps women's cycling in the future. A lot of people, they get their butt handed to them at one time, and they either never come back, or they're the type that like, okay, I see a gigantic challenge in front of me, and they keep coming back and coming back. And that's luckily how I was with my situation. Mm-hmm. And so maybe by having the 4s and 5s, it'll give, where it's a little softer of an entrance into women's cycling, where you're not racing with, where a new girl racing is not racing against you in her very first race or something like that.
Yeah. And it's easy to be misunderstood. If anyone really, really knows me, like a friend or something, like I'm, especially in training races and early races or regional races, like, and if I'm doing well, like if I am doing better than someone else and I come up to them and give them advice, it's not like I'm trying to get in their head, because I'm like, I'm already beating you. Like, I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to mess with your head. But little things, like I would see people make huge efforts and they're pulling on the front, and I might come up to them and say, "Hey, since you're working on the front, put us in the gutter." Like, just absolutely, the wins from here. And it's so funny because I would tell people things like that, and unless they don't understand, like they just simply don't know, and they take it as a negative. I'd say like, "Hey, you're pulling the whole group back. Why don't you just bridge up to me? You and I down the road. How's your sprint working out? You always get 9th. How would you like to get 2nd?" Like, and people will take that wrong, like that I'm being mean. Like sometimes I was like, I realize you don't know what you don't know, and then maybe I could say it like in a nicer way. I don't know, because I love women's racing, and I really want to see everybody use the tactics and like the men do. Like I've done so many races where you're just suffering when it's pinned, to the gutter. So I do try to give back like that. And I think sometimes it's misunderstood, but I do try. People might find that hard to believe, but I love the sport so much. It drives me crazy when I see someone and I realize, oh, they could be better if they did this. So I'll go up and tell them.
Yeah.
It's like, wait, they didn't ask for that advice, Debbie. Maybe I shouldn't tell them.
Well, and probably just like, conversations during races and during training rides are not always, they're kind of concise normally, and maybe taking, it's hard to be extra friendly and when your heart rate's at 160, 170 beats per minute. So
yeah, it's true.
So
and
like
things that aren't safe. That's one thing that I will do. I'm all about safety and rules. I cannot stand it when people aren't being safe or they're not following the rules or they're trying to see what they can get away with. That's when I shouldn't try to be the police out there, but I can't help it sometimes. So yeah.
It's kind of, I guess it's cliche, but that's what the rules are there for, to keep everybody safe.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So, tell me how, and this is, I think probably, I'm sure your training has evolved. It probably looks completely different now than it did when you first started, since you started just kind of commuting. But like, how has your training evolved over time? When did you actually get into a training program, working with someone? If I assume you did that, working with a coach maybe, but like, what's your training? What did it look like then? And what does it look like now?
Okay. When I started out, I told you I was hauling kids around and I mean, that's heavy. I figured it was like 140 pounds I was pulling around. So I was just wrong. And there's a lot of things that make you good at racing, many things, but training's one, and also tactics, like the how to use your strength, when to use your strength. But so what I used to do, because I didn't have I was new to this. So I would think of what is the hardest thing that I can think of doing that isn't so hard that I can't do it. Like I wouldn't say ride 500 miles in a day. That's stupid, right? But I would think of very hard things, and I was a miles junkie. I lived in rolling hills. So my goals were to get tons of miles, as many as I could get, like 15,000 a year, mainly solo, because, I'd ride early in the morning, and also to do very difficult things like that I would have to complete, like there was a set of hills that were about 12%. And so many people would laugh if they heard me saying this, but I would go do the 6 set of 6 repeats. So many people are so tired of hearing of them, but they were epic to me. I would ride 40 miles to where some steep hills were. And I would do 6 repeats on each one of them. So there were 6 sets of 6. And by the time I finished that and rode home, it was like 120 miles. It was really hard. Nice. Yeah. And so I would do that to get ready for elite professional championships, because I knew there was climbing and I knew there was no extended climbing, in Mississippi. So I would just do that. And then I did successfully enough. And I asked my mentor and he had a bike shop in Tupelo, and I was like the club newsletter person. I organized things. I did the Christmas parade. And this is back where you had to type an email, type up a club letter and mail the thing.
Oh yeah.
I did St. Jude fundraising rides. I did a lot of stuff like that. But he was from Indiana, Cat 1 racer, I think, and Brian Piazza. So I was like, how do you train? Because I didn't know. So he gave me a regimen, like Monday rest day, Tuesday sprints, Wednesday intervals, Thursday, your tempo ride, Friday rest day, Saturday and Sunday, just go mix it up. The hardest thing you could do. So I did that forever, and it seemed to work. And I was a great breakaway rider. I was all about average speed. Like I did not want to see below 23 miles per hour. But I never rested. Like the rest day was hard. I didn't know what a true rest was. Right. So I had some success with that. And then I would go do like professional. I had kids, so I wasn't going to go do a bunch of professional level stuff and travel everywhere. But I would go to the professional elite at that time, same people, national championships, get 6th or 7th or 10th. I just didn't know how to win it if I wasn't in a break, like by myself. So I remember about in 2012, I did really well in a race called Dothan something or another. They paid so well. And I ran into Andrew Crater, and I didn't know him, but he was like, why don't you do more professional stuff? I said, I don't know. My kids are young. They're getting older, but I don't know what to do. And he said, well, I could coach you. So from afar, he would give me, this is the first time I had a different way of training. And I don't think I'm giving away tons of secrets, but it was a lot more intervals and different than I'd ever done them. And it made a huge difference. The first year, like he was coaching me, I was like second in USA crits and lap leader. Yeah, before I had a crash in Boston, and then I couldn't do the last one in Las Vegas. But I found out like I've learned how to sprint,
Yeah.
So training, like getting a coach that tells you like, oh, sprinting's different. Here's the form you need. You do it this way. I didn't know those things. So most of my sprints looked like I was trying to climb a hill. Like I really looked awkward as a sprinter because I just didn't know how to sprint. So having a coach help with that, like the form, when you sprint, I had climbing down. That's what I thought I was, a climber. But those intervals really helped be able to do more than just be a breakaway rider and ride just a steady, hard pace, like a time trialist to get off the front. I was able to go with moves and go with moves and go with moves like it is in a race at a professional level and, and not get dropped from the back. So then about that time, shortly after, I had to work full time. So basically it becomes riding as much as I can, high, not neglecting intervals, but going to like Tuesday night worlds and basically still, I'm always, like I say, nothing works like miles to me, especially when you still do road racing. So I get as many miles and as much elevation as I can. I know that a lot of coaches would be going, oh, you've got so much more that you could do. But I never even I don't use any data, like none.
Okay.
What I learned is it's kind of like, I can't think of his name, Tilford. He would always say, I'm either on the wheel going down the road or I'm not,
Oh yeah.
And that's about how I rode. Like I knew my limits. I knew when I could go faster and I knew when I couldn't. Yeah. And so anything I've achieved has been that. So a coach might say, oh, but you could have done so much more if you watched your power. And so I'm not against that. I'm just at my age, I just not going to start it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to push myself. I'm going to get tons of miles and I'm going to rest.
Yeah. Do you use power now or do you just stay away from it completely?
I don't use it. I'm sure it has a good use. I mean, I know people use it. I think that heart rate correlates a lot with it if you're rested. So on climbs, I did begin to look at my heart rate, like on an extended climb, because I ride with an Apple Watch. So but when I did have a little bit of a computer on my bike watching heart rate, when I climb, I knew I could tease myself into a heart rate range that I couldn't hold for long and back out real quick. But when you're trying to climb somebody, those little seconds, like they count, especially like some of the Fondo riding where you got timed climbs. So I knew when I could jump into, and maybe power correlates with that. Like, oh, I can be in this power for this many seconds, but I have to stay, so I would kind of play with that with heart rate.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I've been on both sides of that fence as far as, no power or power. I started out for the longest time really because I was too broke to buy power that I just stated I didn't have it, and I was all about miles. And for me, so I got out of the Navy, I was in graduate school and was all about miles because I had time. And then I started teaching. And at that time, I think the interval stuff started working for me a little better. Like that's when I focused on maybe the efficiency of training and started doing some intervals. And I felt like that was pretty helpful for me because I was just kind of out cruising around collecting miles. What I did learn with power was that I was never really pedaling that hard in the first place. And that was one thing that my very first coach was Dave Brown. And when he would give me these intervals and what kind of wattages to hold, I was like, Dave, I don't think I can hold that for 10 minutes or, and he's like, no, you can't, go do it. And then I was like, oh yeah, I just did it. And I found out that I have to actually push really hard on the pedals, much more so than I was doing before. And so I always joke about that I soft pedaled my best years away. And so for me, the power was really helpful just to see like, this is what cycling is supposed to feel like. And that really, I mean, for me, it got me over a hurdle and kind of, I think brought my fitness to where it is now. But I wish I'd had power a long time ago so I could have made that realization years earlier.
Well, I think in some ways, like for me, like I was so just avidly determined to have a certain average speed. It just wasn't any soft pedaling because the downhill was a way to make up for time lost on an uphill. So when you're someone who's just so focused on average speed, you end up using like a lot of power, but you don't really get the interval part of it where you get into those higher. I can tell you with my heart rate, like once I got a training plan from a coach, a lot of my rides would be not average. Like, let's just pick a heart rate, like 150. Instead of saying, oh, you come back in with a 150 average heart rate. No, you come back in with almost a straight line at 150. Like try to maintain that like on a flat or on going downhill. Like you'd never like, you're just like never resting. So 3 hours, 150, same thing is like, it was hard. And I'm sure if I saw the power to do that,
Yeah.
it would varied maybe, I don't know. Cause when you're climbing, it's easier for your heart rate to go up, but I'm not a good person to talk to about power cause I've never
Yeah.
used it.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting though that you don't. I guess probably the assumption is that all the the top racers are training with power, and so I think that's cool that you don't. I know some riders locally that are really strong and they've always been strong, and they just don't use power, and really they do the same as you did. They go out and ride a bunch. They ride up some hills. They ride up some mountains. They go fast when they feel good. They take rest days when they don't feel great, and it seems to work out. I think we tend to overcomplicate things. Especially with cycling, and then you throw numbers and wattages and heart rates into it, and there's a lot of things to get complicated with. And so I think it just gets which is one thing I always liked about Dave Brown, was that he was a very, not a simple coach, but he kept things very simple for me. It was like, hey, go out and do this, and it wasn't like some magic formula that I needed to be doing. It was actually just I needed to be going out and riding more.
Yeah. And
Well,
then,
that's
if
cool.
you go and ride a lot of miles and they're easy and slow, that's basically what you learn to do. So when I say lots of miles, they weren't like, just strolling out, like having a great day on the
Yeah.
bike. It's very focused, there's this nice little zone to get in. But intervals to me is that thing that I don't think I can neglect and do well, at least in criteriums.
Right.
That, yeah, just those very intense focused intervals. They really help with criterium racing a lot to me. From an unexperienced, like with power numbers and coaching. I just, when I do them, I do better. If I don't do them, I'm hanging in there and doing pretty good. So I've learned to appreciate intervals. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I forgot to mention in your intro too that you're also a registered dietitian and a sports nutrition consultant and the founder of Supra Functional Food Bars, the company you make food bars. And I bet that you probably had a great recipe that you used to make, and everybody started asking you for it, because I was looking at the food bars on the website, on the Super website, and they look really good. And that was my assumption about how this company came about. But tell me about cycling as a nutritionist and how important that is to your training. Talk about nutrition.
All right. All things equal, there's a lot of things that you have to start manipulating. You have your genetic, like your natural talent. And then you run into people with the same natural talent, right? So nutrition is one of the things that if you get better than someone else, it's going to make a huge difference. And actually, it can be pretty detrimental not to get it right. Sleep is another one, equipment, training, rest, a lot of different things. But nutrition, that we only do what we do because of the substrates, or the energy systems we have in our body. So depending on the type of competition you have, like maybe that there's a huge difference between an Ironman cyclist and someone who has to go out and do criterium and long stage racing, because you cannot control the level to which your heart rate, you have to ask it to reach, right? Based on the efforts to be able to go with moves or just still stay with a group. So you use a lot of your anaerobic system, and carbs are like the pay dirt for that. So, eating adequate protein for recovery, that's another, super important thing. Fat's really important. And there's a lot of, like, for example, like ketogenic athletes out there that can go really hard for, long periods of time at a moderate heart rate, but they can't really compete as well with the amount of carbs or energy you can get per hour by using carbohydrate versus fat, not per hour, but let's say per minute. Carbohydrate. So, and just to give you a little background, I made the bars long ago when I couldn't afford to buy Pro Bar. I loved that bar. And I thought, what would I put in my own bars if I made them? So that's the story. I made my bars. People loved them. I made the beet, like different flavors based on, I got to handpick what I wanted in it.
Yeah.
I've been taking care of the gut, because you have to have a lot of simple sugars, back to carbs. You really do have to have a lot of simple sugars for that quick absorption to get them in those windows of about 60 to 90 grams an hour, that can be even absorbed from the gut. Because once you run out of glycogen, you have muscle dysfunction, and you have to rely on what's in your bloodstream, like the blood sugars from what you've eaten. So a lot of people will tell me I wasn't hungry. I wait till my body tells me that I'm hungry. And I'm like, no, you have to eat on schedule. You have to eat ahead of need, because you need these carbohydrates for the type of event that you're doing. baseball player, they don't have to worry so much about it.
Yeah.
But the kind of thing that you and I do, you need some carbs, and you don't need to miss any window for taking them in. Now, I messed that up hugely when I was probably doing some of my best racing, like off the front, because I had a lot of things going in my life, and some people with stress, they overeat. I was the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't eat. I was trying to eat like 800 calories a day and just really caught up in an eating disorder, because that was my way of handling things that I couldn't fix, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm lucky I'm still here, I guess, because the way I stressed my body with the poor nutrition I gave it. And then I realized with my background in nutrition, and I went back to school and worked on a master's degree in health promotion, which is it's basically all aspects of health, not just your physical health, but like your social, emotional, vocational, spiritual health, all those things. How they interact and how they affect one another. I began to understand myself and why I was doing what I was doing. So I began to eat better. And then I started working full time, and I went into dietetics. Yeah. So I can really relate to having people who have a poor relationship with food. And I don't like the messages in the cycling community that I hear, like eating is cheating, or if you're skinny, you'll be faster. And I'm like, your body wants to weigh a certain amount. Like it really does. There's a natural weight for you at performance level. There are guidelines that are in place and everything we do is evidence-based as a registered dietitian, that if you follow those guidelines, there's going to be, you can either say I am or am not meeting my carb needs or my protein needs to support the kind of efforts that I'm making. Mm-hmm. So I try to help people understand that, like, you have to support your training. If you are under eating and you have like relative energy deficiency syndrome, like there's a lot of consequences in hormone production and fatigue and depression. A lot of people can have, like rhabdomyosis and different issues come up because, they're following some low carb trend, or they think sugar is bad. Yeah. Yeah. So, and you read the funniest advice from people, like, and you want to comment, like I want to comment, but the people making the advice aren't claiming to be certified in anything.
Right.
Anybody can say they're a nutritionist. They can take a 2-hour course, get a certificate, and say, I got a certificate of nutrition.
Yeah.
Not everybody can say they're a registered dietitian or a board certified sports dietitian, which they don't hand that out either. You have to take a special exam and you have to have practice hours. And I had that for 5 years. And then working in healthcare, I lost the practice hours, not the expertise, but the practice hours. So
right.
I'm about 100 hours short of taking my exam again. But
okay.
I spent 5 years as a board certified sports dietitian.
Well, did your underfeeding, was it caused by cycling? Because I've heard of a lot of cyclists that have eating disorders because so much of the sport is about that power to weight ratio, and they're worried about their weight, and they're hearing this talk, like you mentioned, like, it's faster to not eat. And you hear about riders that finish a ride and they go to bed hungry, and it seems like, and then you see the pro peloton in any pro race, and these guys are super thin. And then I used to race I was about 142 when I was racing, and I never got any stronger. Maybe it was because of my training, but maybe it was because I was just constantly underfed also. And
probably
did your eating disorder, was it started by cycling, or is it just made worse by cycling, or was it all totally separate?
Well, it was present before I started cycling.
Okay.
I know everybody's not ready for like a psychotherapy discussion, but
yeah.
But pretty much from high school and college, I had issues. It was the way I handled stress and disappointing things.
Okay.
Then once I started cycling, that was a bad combo because you need a lot of energy to do that. So cycling didn't really cause it, but I'm super sensitive when, like, I'll talk to different people. Like I've helped a lot of cyclists, and I can't understand, like they would say to me, I can understand, but they would say, like, that's a lot of food. I go, well, what do you base that on? Like, why do you say this food? And then I find out that they bought into this idea that lighter is faster. And I was like, well, you're under eating. You're going to cause your metabolic rate to slow by, I don't know, I can't remember the last time, maybe 25% when you're underfed with carbs and nutrition. So you're kind of cheating yourself out of getting more nutrients in, if you're thinking strictly on weight, you're
right.
they get this idea, or the seeds that other people plant. It makes me mad when I hear someone prominent in cycling give out tips about how to stave off hunger. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's my principle as a dietitian. When you are hungry, you should eat, period.
Yeah. Okay.
Period. That you should eat when you are hungry. And it's good, really good practice to stop when you're full, right?
Right.
Sometimes you have to eat past fullness, because I know race day, I'm so sick and nervous. If I listen to my body, I'd eat nothing because I'm just sick and nervous. But there I am checking down and everything. But so there's sometimes you eat when your body's like saying, whoa, no. But eat on schedule. Like, to me, that's one thing I teach you. First of all, nourish your body. That's number one priority.
Mm-hmm.
Second, support your athletic endeavors, and that's what I find out if people are doing. And I do think I think a lot of people get into it because someone sold them the lie that, that you can't eat and still perform, or eat to meet your needs and still be good at what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and carbs are the bad guy. It seems like on all the diets, the fad diets, keto and paleo and all the diets, carbs are the bad guy. But it is sort of counterintuitive, as a cyclist who we are fueled by carbohydrates, that you start cutting carbs, and obviously that's going to impact your performance. And you mentioned 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour on the bike. Was that right? Yeah,
I've heard all kinds of, I read all kinds of stuff. Again, I'm hesitant to comment. I'd rather talk to someone personally because they're not making it going to be a board certified anything. But that is what the guidelines are, and that's because you can only absorb that much. That's why they're there. The same for about everyone. It isn't based on weight, but recovery nutrition and just general carb intake is based on weight. So as an endurance athlete, at least for the level that we do this, ever want to see below 5 grams per kilogram. Maybe you would do that out of season when you're trying to trim up weight, but generally between 8 to 10 grams per kilogram, and you might not have that on a rest day, but on training days, because that is what the International Society of Sports Nutrition and the most current recommendations are. So like if I weighed 50 kilograms, I haven't memorized my weight in kilograms. It's somewhere near that. But if I weighed that, then I don't want to see less than 400 grams of carbs a day. And I have to work on that to get it. So the way I teach people is like figure out how to meet that through 3 meals and maybe 2 snacks. And then and then when you do your training over an hour, like 2 hour or more training, you need 60 to 90 grams, or maybe you could do 30 grams on a rest day of carbs per hour for every hour, starting the first hour. And then you have your recovery nutrition, which is about 1 gram per kilogram of carbs and about 0.5 grams per kilogram in protein, or 0.4. 5. But that's what the dietitian does. There's a science out there, and then they look at the art of you and see, are you working? Are you sedentary all day? Do you mow yards for a living? What are you going to be your carb needs based on all those things? Because we are asking our body to do a huge endeavor to train like we do. We're running, basically it's a state of acute metabolic stress, not unlike getting surgery. The stress ends when you stop exercising, but we're doing that willingly, like every single day. We're stressing our body. So if I could go back in time, I don't know how well I would have done if I had been nourished my body like I should have, but I can't get that time back. So.
Right. Well, and that's same with me. I wish I could have gone back and eaten normal, and I think my natural weight's 155 to 160, and I wish I'd let myself be that back then. Yeah. But yeah, we can't go back and do it, but we can start doing it right now, I guess, if we're not doing it right. And I honestly think that I probably have some improvements that I could be making with my own relationship with carbs even now, because I'm always like, I'll eat carbs on the bike, probably not enough. I'll do a 2-hour ride and eat a Cliff Bar while I'm out, which I think they have 30 grams of carbs, and so I'm riding for 2 hours on 30 grams, which is obviously not enough. But then I get back and I'll have some carbs when I get home. But then, I'm eating a lunch that's probably low on carbs. It's vegetables and some sort of meats. And, I'll have to get you to take a look at my nutrition at some point, because like I said, there probably are some carb needs that I'm not getting.
Yeah. And the thing is like when you train, especially like let's say you started masters racing, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
You have to do, like I was telling you, my intervals 3 days in a row. really, it's not realistic to think you can get your glycogen levels back up to topped off by the next day's of intervals, because it's about 2% restoration rate per hour. So, usually you're training again and sometimes people have 2-a-days, like they ride in the morning, then they go do some, Saturday, Tuesday night ride or something.
Yeah.
So you're not really going to get your glycogen levels up. So every day it's like a sawtooth effect where your glycogen levels are decreasing. That's why rest day is so great, because you get to, rest, not spend the glycogen, eat well, get your carbohydrate stores back up for training again. When glycogen levels reach a certain level in millimoles per, I can't think of the exact science, but when they reach a certain depletion level, the muscle function decreases. So, so you won't get the same quality workout. You really want to grab as much carbohydrate and restore glycogen as much as possible. And people manipulate that and train in low glycogen situations, like it's called nutritional periodization, where they tailor like training some with a low carb environment and training some with a high, but it's so methodical. Like, you'd have to work with your nutritionist and your coach. And I've mainly seen those studies in runners, not so much cyclists. And so I don't even consider it as like, that's too much stress. I don't tell anybody about that, but I will tell them to meet their carb goals per hour after like a 4-hour ride. I'm like, okay, hour 1, this many grams of carbs and protein. Hour 2, same thing. And it might be a meal. That's what's great. Maybe feeding 3 is a meal. But especially when you're racing, getting your glycogen levels back up there is really important for what you're going to be able to do, at the end of a long race the next day.
Yeah. Okay. It's probably important, I'd say also, and you might want to comment on it too, that maybe all carbs are not equal. I think, if let's go with that. All carbs are not equal. It's probably a good idea not to refuel with like Cinnamon Toast Crunch as opposed to, some sort of healthier carbohydrate, obviously. But, how important are the decisions for carbohydrates off the bike more important than the kinds you're getting on the bike? I think maybe on the bike, you're looking more at simple sugars because they're faster. Is that true? And then maybe off.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like the closer proximity to the exercise endeavor, either post or after, the more simple the sugars. And I read a lot of people talking about not wanting their blood sugars to spike during exercise. And I'm reading advice and I'm thinking, I don't think I've seen that in literature, because when you're exercising, an exercising muscle doesn't need insulin to take up glucose. The exercise itself activates those GLUT4 transporter proteins to surface, kind of like insulin would do, kind of unlock the doors to take blood sugar out of your bloodstream. Well, exercise has an insulin-like effect. So you really don't run the much risk of having blood sugars spike if you're exercising. Now, I get it, not having way too many simple sugars before you start exercising.
Right.
But so generally, I will, and again, you got to get it out of your stomach. So the closer to an event, the more simpler the carbohydrates. I try to use whole food as much as possible until I get to on the bike, let's say, because once there, like I don't like reflux, and I don't want it to be difficult to digest. But at the same time, if you're riding 6 hours, it gets really hard to constantly have, a carb drink and gels. So generally, I try to say as much as you can tolerate whole foods like potatoes or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, to take with you on the ride. But even then I would recommend white bread, because you really do want it to digest fast and get into your bloodstream.
Okay.
And then just after exercise, when you're in this like heightened anabolic state and you're really trying to get glycogen levels back up, more simple carbohydrates within, like that recovery nutrition. I'd say if you're going to finish up and go eat a meal, just don't, just go eat the meal, because you're going to get carb. Make sure you don't get, like you said, just non-starchy vegetables and protein. With some potatoes or, some bread and different things. But as farther away you are, it's always better to have more fiber. Fiber is so important to the gut. So the only way, carbs that are not simple usually have a lot of fiber with them, and all the nutrients that come along with the higher fiber choices. So I'd say the farther you post 1-2 hours after exercising, everything switched to whole grain and less refined. So for example, I might decide to, if I have to wake up, I always say this is my nutrition. When do we race? 8 o'clock. okay, I need sleep. So do I need to wake up at 4 and eat and miss my sleep, or do I need to wake up at 6 or, and get adequate sleep? Well, if I wake up at 6, then I'm going to eat like maybe instant oatmeal or grits or something more simple. But if my race is at 11 and I can wake up at 7, I might eat a regular meal without all those simple carbs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I base it on how close I have to race to waking up,
right.
or the meal for it. Yeah.
I used to do as a Cat 5. I used to do that, and I always hated because Cat 5's race at like 7 a.m. It seemed like, and so I was having to get those are my earliest mornings ever race days because I had to eat something, a couple hours before the race, and then it seemed like they were always. I live right on the edge of the Central Time Zone, and so Tennessee is split. If you go to Chattanooga, you're in the East Time Zone. If you're in Knoxville, you're in East. But if you go to Nashville, you're in the Central. And so a lot of these races were in the Eastern Time Zone. So I was having to operate an hour earlier since they're an hour ahead of us. So it was real early mornings.
Poor Cat.
I know. I couldn't for various reasons. And we mentioned too, like just the chaotic nature of a Cat 5 race and in the early mornings. When I finally moved to 4s, I was like, oh, good. We're we're racing at noon. That's much more appropriate. So
much better, yeah. Especially 3-4 race, then you're like, oh, we were right for the Cat 3s. This is awesome.
Yeah.
We got to go after the Masters. All right.
Yeah. That was all I was caring about when moving out of 5s was the later wake up time. Hey, tell me also about your latest achievement that I didn't mention. Also, was your if any listeners are also listeners to the Move podcast with Lance Armstrong, they will have heard your name already because you're one of the We Do segment winners for the women age group. I guess it was the 50 to 54 age group. You won the segment. So tell us about that.
Well, I can say that I heard about it from the first week they started it. It went on all during the Tour de France. So 3 weeks that you could go out there. And it's not too far of a drive, maybe an hour and a half. And when we thought about doing it, and Andrew, my husband, he was always like, you need to go do this. You need to go do this.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't know. Everybody gravel's going to do it. Nah. And I was busy, I'm trying to work. And I just disregarded it because I thought, all these gravel lovers are going to come do it. and then we had Sonny King, and that was important. So when I went, he was like, I'm telling you need to do it. I think you can meet this time. At that time, the best time was like 19 or 20.
Okay.
20 minutes. And he says, I really think you can do this. So anyway, I was like, okay. So, we were going on a trip to the Blue Ridge Parkway, like I told you about. So I had one day to do it. And I wanted to ride the bike I was used to riding. I was like, I don't even have a gravel bike. So I said, I'm just going to go. And I used to ride gravel all the time on a road bike. So I'm not afraid to do it. We used to do a tough one called Rouge Roubaix. So I said, okay, maybe I'll do great. I don't know. So we went out there and I looked at the climb. I looked at the percent grades. This is a preparation I had. I was thinking, I definitely need a 34. I got a 32 on the back. I really need a 34. My tires were like 25s or something. And, the road tires. But I was like, I was thinking more of like being able to turn the gear over because I knew I wouldn't be able to stand much, with those. So anyway, I went out there. I didn't warm up enough. I didn't warm up enough. And so I go up in this gear that I know isn't right, a 36, 32. And I was supposed to turn around if I didn't think it was a good effort. But if anybody knows me, I have a hard time just bailing.
Yeah.
So I'm halfway up it and I'm suffering, trying to turn over this gear, dying 1,000 deaths. And I'm super pissed and mad that I don't have the right gear. And I'm like, well, maybe this is a good time. I have my Apple Watch, no data. So I go to the top and I'm ready to kill things. I'm so mad. And you don't know how well you do because you kind of look at your stopwatch, but you don't get to upload the segment. And I know it's like, nope, that isn't good enough. That wasn't good enough. So we went back down, rim brakes. It was strenuous. And Andrew was like, you need to do it again. I was like, I don't want to do it again. That hurt really, really, really bad. He was like, no, let me get you a different gear. So he put on, he blocked out a different cog set. I don't know, it was a mountain bike cog set. Yeah. So that I at least had a 35, I think, or 36 or 34. Went back up again. It's raining now. Didn't warm up enough. And I beat it by 30 seconds though. And this is I just gutted myself, 15 minutes before.
Yeah.
That was the best I could do with no recon, no prep. And, kudos to everybody that took it seriously and went out there and figured out what they needed to do for such a generous prize. But I was, I realized I'm not going to be in the overall. I'm not going to be in the open contention. So I changed my category to my age group.
Okay.
Yeah. It was so beautiful. Like I fell in love with it. Like it really sat with me several days. I just want to go do that again, especially the second time when it was raining on me. And I was like, it is what it is. This is just a beautiful place to be.
Yeah. That's cool. When I found out it was gravel, I was thinking about, I was like, it'd be fun to go do that. I knew it'd be a climb, obviously, but when I saw that it was gravel, I was like, nah, I didn't. Yeah. I don't have a gravel bike either. I'm still a rim brake road bike racer. So I'm happy to hear that you're still on the rim brakes also. But I saw that it was gravel and decided not to do it. I think that's awesome though that you did it, and especially like the conditions, having done it once and then going and giving it a second try. I think that's really cool. Yeah, and hopefully,
I didn't really want that. I said I had my heels down about that. I was just mad that I had settled for the wrong gear the first time, but I did it the second time. Like super glad. Yeah.
That's cool. I think it's awesome. When I heard your name on the show, I thought, man, that is so cool. Well, hey, you know what? I think that's a pretty great time. We've gone about almost an hour now, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and talk to us and just tell us about, your racing, your training, and especially, talking to me about nutrition. It's sometimes overlooked in the cycling community, and especially we spoke briefly about it, the underfeeding problem and just the eating disorders that seem to be, fairly prevalent in the cycling community just because of the weight, being so important. And hopefully the listeners can learn something from that. How can we follow you on like what social media? You're on Instagram, and tell us about your Supra company also real quick.
Oh, okay. So Supra functional food bars, and real quick, the name functional food is like functional nutrition. It's like looking at the whole person, like what people eat and the kind of foods they choose to eat. A lot of that plays into it, like their activity level. What, do they have any genetic alterations that, their food choices should be different. It's not like, it's like my bars, it says designed by athletes for athletes. I like to tell people it's for people on the move. And maybe that's because I do have agave syrup in it, and that might be a simple sugar, but I believe in whole foods on the gut as much as possible, as much as possible, because fiber and just whole nutrients are so good for the gut. And I've seen a lot of people that get gut disturbances, maybe leaky gut, or like just have so much gastric issues. Like your gut is the center of your immune health. So that's my thing. I really like to take good care of the gut. So there's a lot of fiber in it, like, just ground flaxseed and ground chia seed and good fats in there, and just nice sources of carbs from dates and, almond butter based oats, rolled oats and So anyway, I did get a share kitchen and got a license, and I'm a dietitian. So we started making them, but we also do Super Performance. We have a club with 77 plus members.
Okay.
And we try to help people be part of a club and feel like they belong, and help them learn about cycling. Like we do group rides and that type of thing. COVID kind of threw things off for 2020 and even into 2021.
Yeah.
But we do skills and drills camps, and we give nutrition talks, and that's what Super is about. So we have Super functional food bars that are on Facebook and Instagram. Our website is like superbars.com. And I do encourage, I'm just going to throw it out there, anybody that is not eating enough because they think that's good advice, or they find that they're hungry and they're not eating, that there's a good chance that your relationship with food is off. And I would get with the right kind of nutrition expert, and registered dietitians or board certified sports dietitians. A lot of times people can have a certificate from the IOC as well, but I would look for the credentials. I wouldn't have someone say, oh, I've just become a new nutrition expert. I've seen 18-year-olds giving nutrition advice. Yeah. So I would say get with a qualified expert, and I can promise you it can get so much better, so much better, your relationship with food and your performance, if you eat well and, give your body what it needs to do what you're asking it to do.
Yeah.
Especially for well aging. I mean, I plan to live as long as I can. Masters Nats, they had like an 85 plus age group.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
See, so you still, you've won 9 Masters titles so far. So, you got,
You never know.
Yeah, I mean, you can double that. You can double that. You got a good 20 years left of racing, I think. So,
Maybe more.
yeah, maybe 20 or 30 years. But
Well, one more title, 10's an even number. I was like, come on, just one more.
yeah, but so was 20 though. So you never know.
Yeah.
You could be in the 80s group one day, climbing up there to claim your 20th title. So
that would be amazing to live that long and still be.
Yeah, no doubt. So superbars.com, right, is where they can find those, and I'm going to try those too. I'm excited about trying those, and because what's that?
I'm going to ship you some. I got your address, so
okay, cool, and I appreciate that. I'm a fan of Whole Foods while I ride. I don't like gels, and I like bars and I like real foods on the bike. So I'm excited to try those, and I do appreciate you sending those. So Debbie, thanks for coming on and talking. Okay. Thanks again to Debbie Milne for being our guest on the show this week. Again, if you are looking for some whole food on the bike nutrition, you can check out Debbie's Supra functional food bars at www.suprabars.com. That's SUPRA bars.com. And as for us at Off the Front Podcast, I will be back next week with another show. So until then, stay fast, stay strong, and we'll talk soon.